A poor rancher rescued 3 giant Apache brides. The next day, their chief forced him to choose one. The storm had passed, but something else was coming. Silas Ward stood in his doorway, watching 3 figures appear through the morning mist. Figures that shouldn't be alive. Yet there they were. The same 3 Apache women he'd pulled from the wreckage yesterday. But something had changed. They walked with purpose now, like they knew something he didn't. Behind them, a 4th shadow stepped out from the tree line. Taller, broader, the kind of presence that made the air feel heavier. Feathers on his headdress caught the light, but his face stayed hidden in shadow. Silas felt his heartbeat thudding in his chest. Yesterday, he just thought he was helping strangers, but now, as the chief drew closer, Silas realized he'd crossed into something bigger, something ancient, something with rules he didn't understand. The 3 women stood in a line, eyes locked on him, not with gratitude, but with quiet intensity. They weren't looking at him like a rescuer. They were studying him, measuring him. Then the chief raised his hand. His voice cut clean across the clearing, deep and clear, but the words made no sense. "You have proven yourself through action," he said. "Now you must choose." "Choose?" Silas blinked, confused. Choose what? But then the chief's next words struck like thunder. This wasn't about rescue. This wasn't about thanks. This was something far older, something binding. In helping them, Silas had triggered a law he didn't know existed. He'd always been the loneliest man for miles. His small ranch sat like an island in a sea of tall grass. Fence posts leaned sideways. His cattle wandered slowly across land that touched the horizon. Then the storm came, out of nowhere. It turned the sky to ash and bent trees like saplings. Silas barely made it to the barn before he heard it. Voices, real voices, carried on the wind. He grabbed his lantern and pushed out into the dark. Past the barn, past the coop, toward the creek. The water had doubled in size, rushing wild. Something moved in it. 3 bodies clinging to a log. Women, long black hair whipping in the wind. Even soaked and battered, they were taller than any women Silas had seen. Their clothes were torn. Their arms scraped and were bleeding. Without thinking, Silas stepped into the current. It nearly took him down. But he made it to the first woman, unconscious, barely breathing. One by one, he dragged them from the water. Up the muddy slope back to the cabin. Inside, he lit the fire. Gave them what warmth he had. Old whiskey, torn strips of cloth, his only spare blankets. They were Apache. He could tell by their features, their beads, the scraps of fabric not lost to the creek, but they were different. Even in sleep, they carried themselves like royalty. Silas sat in his chair and watched them as the storm tore at his roof. By morning, they were gone, blankets folded. Cabin swept. Only the wet spots on the wood proved they'd been there at all. For a moment, he thought he'd dreamed it. But now, standing on his porch, hearing the chief's voice echo across his land, he knew none of this was a dream. The women were back, but not as survivors. They were something else now. And the choice the chief demanded, it wasn't symbolic. It was real. The chief stepped forward, and the shadows shifted just enough for Silas to see his face, a map of lines drawn by age and duty. "Eyes sharp enough to cut. I am Kuruk," the chief said. His English was clear, though the accent was thick. "These are my daughters." Daughters. The word hit Silas like a hammer. He'd rescued the chief's daughters. No wonder they vanished so quietly. They probably weren't even supposed to be out there. I didn't know," Silas said, removing his hat. "I just heard voices in the storm and—" Kuruk raised a hand. Silas fell silent. "You acted with honor," the chief said, "when many would have turned away. You gave your shelter, your fire, your care. You asked for nothing." The women stood still, statues in the mist. But Silas could feel their gaze, sharp, deep, unwavering, not judgmental. Not thankful, just waiting. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of wood smoke and wet earth. Silas had lived alone for years. He thought he understood solitude. But this moment was the most alone he'd ever felt. One word, one choice, and his life would never look the same. He looked at each of the women. Strong, silent, eyes unreadable. And for the first time in his life, Silas Ward didn't know what to do, because this wasn't just a choice of the heart. It was a choice of fate. Yesterday they'd been unconscious and broken. Today they stood tall like warriors by his proud, alert, watching him closely. In our tradition, Kuruk said, voice calm but firm, when a man saves the life of an unmarried woman, he proves himself worthy of consideration as a husband. He paused. You saved 3. Silas felt his stomach drop. Marriage? He looked around at his sagging porch, the run-down cabin, the cracked field beyond. Chief Kuruk, I'm honored, but I'm just a poor rancher. I can hardly feed myself, let alone... Wealth is not measured only in cattle or gold, Kuruk cut in. A man who risks his life for strangers, without asking anything in return, holds more riches than one who hoards what he'll never share. Then the first woman stepped forward, the one he'd pulled out first from the storm-swollen creek. She was even taller up close, her presence steady, commanding. My name is Ayana, she said softly. You gave me life when I was drowning. The second woman moved beside her. I am Casina. You carried me when my legs gave out. The third followed. I am Winona. You covered me with warmth when I was cold. Their words were careful, almost ceremonial. It didn't feel like gratitude. It felt older than that. Like rituals. Like an oath, Silas looked from the 3 of them to Kuruk, trying to make sense of it all. Choose, Kuruk said simply. One will become your wife, and our peoples will be bound in alliance. This is our way. Silas's thoughts tumbled over each other. Choose? He hardly knew their names. How could he choose a wife? But deep down a quieter fear stirred, that none of them would want a man like him anyway. Still, when Silas met Kuruk's eyes, something inside him still remained. This wasn't just a choice. It was a test. Of something deeper than words. He looked back at the 3 women. His throat is dry. Each of them was striking, strong and self-assured. And beside them, in his patched shirt and worn boots, Silas felt like a hollow tree standing next to a mountain. I need time to think, he managed. Kuruk gave a slow nod. The sun will set once. You must decide before it rises again. Use your time well. Without a word, the 3 women turned and walked, each to a different corner of his land. Ayana headed toward the failing vegetable patch. Casina walked to the corral, where his last 2 horses stood. Winona moved toward the old well by the cabin. Silas watched them go, still dazed. Were they judging him? Testing what little he had? Ayana knelt beside the brittle tomato vines, fingers pressing into the cracked soil. When she looked up, her expression was unreadable. This earth thirsts for knowledge, she said, not just water. Before he could ask what she meant, Casina called from the corral. These horses have known hardship, she said, brushing a hand along his mare's neck. But they still remember trust. At the well, Winona pulled up the rope, filling a bucket with clear water. She held it for a moment, then spoke. Some things run deeper than they first appear. Their words hung in the air like poetry carved from dust and time. Was there meaning in them? A message? Or were they simply seeing this place, seeing him, for what he'd long stopped noticing? Kuruk remained by the cabin, still as stone. You doubt yourself, he said quietly. Silas gave a hollow laugh, motioning toward the leaning fences and wind-battered barn. Look at this place. Look at me. I'm nobody. I've got nothing to offer women like your daughters. Kuruk didn't blink. What do you see when you look at them? He asked. Silas hesitated. Strength, wisdom, beauty. Everything a man could ever hope for. And what do you think they see when they look at you? The question stopped Silas cold. He hadn't thought of that. He'd only seen his own shortcomings. Kuruk spoke again, low and steady. Yesterday they were lost. Today they live because of you. A man who leaves the safety of his fire to wade into a raging creek for strangers. A man who gives up his only blankets. Who watches over the wounded with no promise of return. That is a man who gives more than many ever will. Something shifted in Silas's chest, but the doubt still clung to him. Anyone would have done the same, he mumbled. Kuruk's eyes narrowed gently. Is that so? The question lingered like wood smoke. All across the property the daughters moved in silence, examining, tending, learning. With each passing hour, the weight of the decision pressed heavier on Silas's shoulders. But something else grew too. A quiet realization. Maybe he'd spent too long measuring his worth by the wrong scale. As evening neared, the women returned. But something had changed. The formal distance was gone. Each now carried something from his land. Ayana held a handful of seeds, beans and squash, pulled from the dry garden beds. Casina led the mare by a rope. The old horse stepped steady, almost proud. Winona returned last, carrying the wooden bucket, but it wasn't filled with water. The bucket didn't hold water. It held tools, his father's old hammers and chisels, cleaned and carefully arranged. Ayana stepped forward. "We've seen your land," she said evenly. "And we have a proposal." Silas blinked. "A proposal?" He glanced at them, then at Kuruk, confused. Kasina nodded. "The choice our father speaks of, it isn't yours alone," Winona added. "A husband isn't taken by tradition only. He must also be chosen." Kuruk stood quietly, arms folded, something close to amusement flickering in his eyes. His daughters, it seemed, had inherited more than just his height. Ayana faced Silas directly. "I see a man who keeps growing things even when the earth fights back. If you choose me, I'll teach you what my grandmother taught me. The secrets of soil, seeds, and cycles. Together this land could bloom." Kasina moved to his right. "I see a man who tends his animals even when he has little left for himself. These horses trust you. If you choose me, I'll bring the knowledge of breeding and training. This ranch could thrive." Winona stepped in, completing the circle. "I see a man who keeps what matters intact. His tools, his home, the small things others let fall apart. If you choose me, I'll help you build something that lasts beyond your lifetime." Silas stood frozen. They weren't just accepting the offer, they were offering themselves. Each in her own way. Him. The man who never thought he'd be chosen by anyone. Ayana's voice turned firmer. "But we will not marry a man who thinks himself less than he is," Kasina added. "We won't tie our lives to someone who keeps apologizing for his own worth." Winona met his gaze. "And we won't call a husband a man who believes gold and cattle define a life." Then all three stepped back, leaving Silas alone in the space they'd formed. Kuruk approached quietly. His voice dropped so only Silas could hear. "My daughters are not prizes to be claimed. They are partners to be earned," he paused. "The question is not whether you are worthy of them. The question is whether you understand your worth well enough to be worthy of yourself." The prairie grew still as night settled in. Silas understood then. Tomorrow's choice would be about more than marriage. It would be about the kind of man he chose to become. That night Silas couldn't sleep. He sat on his porch watching the soft glow of the campfire where Kuruk and his daughters gathered. Their voices floated in their native tongue, a melody he didn't understand, but one that felt ancient and steady, like wind in the grass. He thought about each woman's words. Ayana's knowledge could coax life from the stubborn soil. Kasina's skills could rebuild his broken herd. Winona's craftsmanship could raise structures that would stand for generations. But it wasn't their promises that haunted him. It was their challenge. They wouldn't marry a man who couldn't see his own worth. How could he explain the years he'd spent barely scraping by? The failed harvests, the lost calves, the sagging fences and lonely nights. Each disappointment had chipped away at the little belief he had left in himself. By sunrise, he'd made up his mind. He didn't walk to choose between them. Instead, he walked to their camp and addressed Kuruk directly. "I need to show you something," he said. "All of you." He led them behind the cabin to a small rise where the wind met the grass. There, rows of simple wooden grave markers stood, weathered but cared for. The names were carved with care, the wood sanded and sealed. No marker was left unmarked. "These are the people who came through this land before me," Silas said. "Some were travelers. Some got sick. Some froze one winter and didn't make it." Kuruk studied the graves in silence. "You buried them?" "Yes, and I've kept their graves tended for 8 years. People said I was wasting time on the dead, but it felt right." Ayana knelt beside one marker, running her fingers gently across the carved letters. "You gave them dignity in death." Silas nodded. "When I found your daughters in the creek, I didn't stop to ask if I was strong enough or good enough. I just knew someone needed help." Kasina knelt beside another grave, smaller, nearly hidden. "This one says I'm baby girl. Born and died the same day." "I found her mother near the road," Silas said quietly. 3 winters ago. She lived long enough to deliver the baby. I buried them together. I couldn't save them, but I could make sure they were remembered." Winona rose slowly, her gaze softer now. "You measure worth differently than most." Silas took a long breath. "I don't have much. No gold, no fine house, no cattle to brag on. But I know what's right. I know when someone's in need, you don't look away." Kuruk stepped forward and placed a hand on Silas's shoulder. "And now," he said gently, You begin to understand your own value. For the first time since the storm, Silas didn't feel small. He felt steady, like maybe or just maybe he was enough. Silas felt something shift inside him. Not confidence exactly, but something steadier, something rooted. It didn't depend on what others thought of his land or his possessions. Back at the cabin, the three women stood around him with a different kind of energy. The formal distance from yesterday was gone, replaced by something warmer, something real. "We've spoken," Ayanna said. "And we've reached a decision." Silas tensed. Had they all decided to walk away? "The choice," Cassina continued, "should not be yours alone." Winona stepped forward. "We propose a different test. Not of worth, that's already proven, but of compatibility." Kuruk stood nearby, arms crossed, his face unreadable. "Spend one day with each of us," Ayanna said. "See how we work, how we think, how we solve problems. Learn what kind of life we'd build together." And Cassina added, "We'll do the same. We're choosing too." It was fair, more than fair. Silas nodded slowly, the idea settling in like good rain on dry ground. "Today you'll work with me," Ayanna said. "We'll see if you can learn to coax life from stubborn soil." She led him to the garden. But instead of pointing out the dry patches or withered stalks, she knelt beside the healthiest plant. "These tomatoes are small," she said, "but they taste like one." Silas bit into it. The flavor surprised him. Sharp, full, better than anything from a store. "When water is scarce and soil is tired," Ayanna said, "a plant learns to focus its strength. It won't grow big, but it will grow strong." She looked up at him. "You've been doing the same." She taught him to read the leaves like a language, to see what plants were asking for. She showed how to use what he already had to build healthier soil. How planting beans near corn, or basil near tomatoes, could create quiet partnerships underground. But more than teaching, she shared her way of seeing. "My grandmother said the best farmers aren't the ones with the richest land," she told him. "They're the ones who learn how to work with what they've got." Wealth makes farming easier, not better. As they planted new rows, Silas found himself talking freely about lost harvests, dry seasons, and small victories. Ayanna listened without interrupting. She nodded when he explained how he survived his worst winter. "You think like a man who knows his land," she said gently. "Many with more land know far less." That night, as they shared a simple meal by the fire, Silas realized something. Working with Ayanna had felt familiar, not easy but right, like they were speaking the same language. Tomorrow he will work with Cassina, then Winona, and with each day the decision became more complicated, but also clearer. Day 2 began before dawn. Cassina met him at the corral. His 2 remaining horses, a mare and an aging gelding, stood in the cool morning mist. "Your animals tell me who you are," Cassina said, running a hand down the mare's neck. "They're not showing horses, but they trust you." She showed him how to read behavior in the smallest flick of an ear or a shifting stance, how to strengthen their joints, how to build their endurance without breaking their will. Like Ayanna, she didn't criticize what he lacked. She built on what he knew. "This mare was probably wild when she was young," Cassina said. "Now she's calm. Still sharp. You didn't crush her spirit. You gave her work that matched her nature." They spent the day repairing the corral fence, talking through better designs for shelter and breeding. "Some folks want flashy horses," she said, hammering in a new post, "to show off wealth. But real horsemen pick animals that match their purpose, not their pride." She worked fast. Smart, efficient, but never made him feel behind. By dusk, Silas realized he'd learned more in one day than in years of doing it alone. And it wasn't just the skills. It was how she saw the world, as a balance between effort and respect. The 3rd day belonged to Winona. She walked the property with a sharp eye, inspecting the cabin, the barn, even the well, like someone reading the bones of the land. "Your father built this," she said, touching a support beam. "I can see it in the way the foundation sits. He built this to last." Silas was surprised. "How can you tell?" She smiled. "Because he used stones that don't move. And you've kept it up the same way." Winona showed him how to reinforce the roof before winter, how to brace weak joints in the barn walls. She didn't talk much, but when she did, it stayed with him. "A house isn't just shelter," she said, strengthening the well frame. "It's a belief. It says, I'm staying. I'm building something that matters. She saw his patchwork repairs not as desperation, but as care. And she treated his home like something worth preserving. By nightfall, the wind had shifted, and Silas realized something deep in his chest had shifted too. He'd spent so long surviving, he hadn't realized how much life he could still build. Each woman had shown him something different, and each day had revealed something about who he was and who he might become. Tomorrow he will choose. But for the first time, he wouldn't be choosing out of fear. He'd be choosing from strength, so do you. It was the evening of the third day, and all four of them, Silas, Ayana, Kasina, Winona, and Chief Kuruk, had gathered around the fireplace in Silas's cabin. The test was over. Tomorrow a choice would have to be made. Silas looked around the room, his hands resting on his knees. Each of you, he said slowly, has shown me something I never saw before, not just about you, but about my own land, about my own work, about myself. The three women listened, faces calm. No tension, no pressure, just quiet, steady attention. But I've come to realize something, he continued. This choice isn't just about marriage. It's about who I am, and the kind of life I want to build. Kuruk leaned forward just slightly, the firelight flickering across his face. And what have you decided? He asked. Silas looked at each woman. Ayana, with her patient knowledge of how life grows. Kasina, with her deep bond to animals and quiet strength. Winona, who saw permanence where others saw patchwork. I've decided, Silas said softly, that I need to choose with my heart, not just with my head. He stood, stepping toward the center of the room. For once, the weight of being seen fully, honestly, didn't feel heavy. It felt like something earned. He turned to Ayana first. You showed me that my failures in the field weren't failures at all. They were lessons. You taught me that working with the land is wiser than trying to force it to be something it's not. Ayana gave a calm nod, her gaze steady. He turned to Kasina. You helped me see that trust from my animals wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a sign of consistency. You taught me that working with an animal's nature is real strength. Kasina's faint smile said she understood. Then he faced Winona. You helped me see that keeping things running doesn't mean settling. It means building a foundation for something greater. He looked at them all now. Three remarkable women. Each of you could change my life in ways I never imagined. But before I say anything more, he turned to Kuruk. Chief, I'm grateful for the honor you've offered me, but I can't accept it based on tradition alone. These are your daughters, not rewards for good deeds. Kuruk's eyebrows lifted slightly, but he remained still. If I choose one of them, Silas said, her voice even, it has to be because we both feel something real, not because custom demands it. And she has to choose me for the same reason. The room fell quiet. The fire popped softly. Then Kuruk spoke. And if none chooses you in return, then I'll still be grateful, Silas said honestly. These days have taught me more about myself than I've learned in years. Ayana stood first. I choose to stay, she said. But not as your wife. Silas felt his heart stutter until she continued. I want to stay as your partner in the field, in making this land bloom. Marriage should come from love, not just alignment. Then Kasina rose. I also choose to stay, Hakam, as your friend, as someone who understands horses and can help when needed. She paused. But my heart already belongs to a warrior back home. He's waiting. Finally, Winona stood. She didn't hesitate. She stepped closer to Silas. I choose differently than my sisters, she said, her voice low but certain. I choose to stay as your wife, if you'll have me. Because in these 3 days, I haven't just seen a good man. I've seen a man I could truly love. Silas met her eyes, and there it was. Not just respect, not just understanding, but something deeper and mutual. I choose you too, he said quietly. Kuruk rose and placed a hand on each of their shoulders. Then let this marriage be one of choice, not tradition. Built on respect, not obligation. 6 months later, the ranch looked nothing like it had before. Ayana's knowledge turned the dry garden into a patchwork of healthy crops. Katsina returned often to guide the growing herd, her breeding program already producing strong foals. And Winona's repairs to the barn, fences, and cabin made everything sturdier, more efficient, ready for the seasons ahead. But the greatest change was Silas himself. The man who once believed he had nothing to offer had become a man who saw value in what couldn't be weighed or counted. He saw that true wealth wasn't cattle or coins. It was a character. It was commitment. It was courage when someone called for help, and no one else answered. And when the wind blew across the prairie at dusk, and the sun dipped behind the hills, it no longer felt like he was alone.